Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my co-host Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing good. Got our special guest, as usual, Mr. Jonathan Grosse, joining us today.
What's up, guys?
We're fired up to have you, as usual.
I appreciate it.
High energy going into this. Pre-show is high energy. Actual show is going to be high energy.
We're gonna bring.
I got a Larry King thing going here. I don't really know what. I adjusted. We haven't recorded in a couple weeks. I adjusted my camera, and now I got this Larry King thing going here.
That's a good look for you.
Thanks.
We're going to talk about a topic that I think that we're pretty darn qualified to discuss, given our backgrounds as coaches at some pretty elite academic institutions across the college baseball landscape. We're going to talk about high academic baseball, and we'll see where it takes us. But there's a couple things that I'm going to throw out here at the top to keep us on track. But we're going to talk about a common misconception. We're going to talk about the exclusivity of the high academic baseball world. We're going to dispel some level of play myths. We're going to talk about how good academic Division III baseball is, and then we're going to close it out talking about how the impacts, how academic baseball is or is not impacted by some of the roster crunches that are coming up. I think there's a couple things to pull at there. So that's the agenda today, listeners, and we'll see where it takes us here. But first thing, Jonathan, I know you've talked about this and you've been in these shoes when you were at Brown, and I think it's something that gets lost in the sauce a little bit when it comes to the academic world. What's that common misconception that in terms of
biggest
how
thing
it kind of works?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you see, and we hear from families, and even when I was at Brown, you would hear from families is, hey, he's got really good grades, and he might like to play baseball. He can get in because he's got really good grades. And the reality is that's not true at all. You have to have really good grades, and you have to be really, really, really good at baseball. At the end of the day, it's still Division I baseball. They're trying to win. They're trying to get to a regional. I think some you've seen, recently is, Columbia did it Columbia's done it twice, but Penn did it 2 years ago. You're seeing Ivy League schools get into a regional final. And it's not just, hey, I got really good grades. I go to a really good private school. Oh, and I like to play baseball a little bit. Like I'm okay. It has to be the same level of academics has to be athletically as well, because that's just the reality of what you're trying to get into in terms of, especially the Ivy League, probably like, I don't know, 8 or 10 others, Patriot League, obviously 8, 10, a couple others. But the reality is that there's not that many players that are going to have the opportunity to go to one of those schools and play baseball.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Eric who said this, but they're not looking for smart kids who play baseball. They're looking for baseball players who are smart. And I think that's what it fundamentally comes down to. And the other thing that the Ivy Leagues and these high academic schools, they can recruit nationwide. So the number of kids that they have access to, and there's a lot of kids who can get into Ivy League schools who are really good baseball players. But so they can choose from all these guys. They don't have to sacrifice for a smart kid who can get in and he's like a pretty good little baseball player. Like, they don't have to do that. And I think that's one thing that gets missed. And we'll talk about the exclusivity here in a few, but you have to be good enough first, and then you have to have the grades. And it's the exact opposite of what I think a lot of people talk about and maybe preach, is that like, oh, well, you're a really good student, you should go look at Harvard. Like, no. You need to be a good enough baseball player first, and then we'll figure out if the academic piece fits. And I think it gets flip-flopped on its head. And I think it really throws a wrench in things for a lot of people who go into this not understanding that that's actually how it works.
I I'm sorry, guys. I know we're a little crunched for time on this recording. I was wondering when we started what was off in this podcast, and I couldn't put my finger on it until I was muted and I realized you shaved your beard.
I did.
Yeah. That threw me for a loop. Looked at Brianna. I was like, yo, Andy shaved his beard.
First time in like 7 years. It's
that threw me for a loop, everybody. Haven't seen that in a while. So back to the exclusivity. I think we've talked about this, the last time we did this was just probably close to a year, if not longer ago. But it's worth mentioning for everyone who's a new listener who hasn't gone back and listened. We've talked about this, the three of us offline and on the show, but the Ivy League is probably the most, it's the most exclusive league to play in from a college baseball standpoint. Like there's only 65-ish, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Give or take?
I would just average eight times eight.
All right. So 64, 65 kids that are legitimately going to be able to go play in the Ivy League every year. And that's not the case in any other conference in America. Like they're bringing in 10, 11, 12, 13 guys pending years. It's still Division I baseball. It's still really good. And like you can look at, Hayden Schatz is probably is the one that comes top of mind right now. He transferred out of Columbia as a grad transfer and went and played 2 years at A&M and was a dude who hit in the middle of the lineup. Like that guy was playing in the Ivy League, playing really, really high competitive baseball there. And by the way, he's also got a Columbia degree. And that's not the only guy, right? Like there's a lot of guys we saw during COVID who transferred out of the Ivies because they weren't allowing, like they don't allow grad students to play. So they left and went and played at a bunch of other bigger conference schools. I know Penn had some guys, I know Harvard had some guys, and I'm sure I'm missing schools. But, the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of it's Carl's famous line when and a lot of people have said it on here, like when I was at RPI, like we're looking for baseball players who happen to be really smart. It doesn't work the other way around. And I know we've kind of hit on that already, but like it's not so like baseball is not a hobby at the college level. It's not something where it's like, I think I want to do it. Like you ain't going to last if you think you want to do it. This is something that you're going to be doing a ton of hours a week. You have to actually love the game of baseball to be able to go do this in college at any level. You have to love it even more, in my opinion, at higher end academic schools, because you're going to get your ass kicked in the classroom. Like you need to be able to go out there and be able to recover and go out and play baseball and be able to play at a high level too. And that can be hard for some people. And it does take guys a little bit of a time to kind of adjust to that as freshmen. But make no mistake about it. It doesn't matter if it's the Ivy League. It doesn't matter if it's the NESCAC, the Liberty League, the Patriot League. We can go on and on with all these leagues that have high academic schools. And that's not even mention the Southern Cal or the California leagues and other schools that there are. Like it's high end, really good baseball. Like you can't just be it's not 13th grade or a lesser league because they're high academic kids. It's still like you still have to be really good at baseball and also really good in the classroom as well. So, I think that's something like, you guys, I know you guys hear it, Jonathan, like Andy and I hear it. And I heard it when I coached, like, I think I want to do it. Like, you ain't going to last year if you think you want to do it. Like, these are dudes, like, my program is made up of 35 guys who want to play college baseball and want to be really good and go compete. And that's where, that sets apart the difference of like, well, they think they want to, like, you ain't going to last, man. You have to really, really want to be able to do this because it is a rather exclusive club to kind of be in when you get into the high academic world.
There was a clip last night, really good, and it hits right on what you said, Keith. Quarterback from Boston College at the end of the game, they said, "Hey, so what do you got? Short week, played on Monday night. You got to flip around on Saturday and play again. What do you got this week? Get your body right. How are you going to get your body right and get yourself going? Be able to play again on Saturday." And he looked at the reporter and he's like, "Well, first off." He goes, "I go to Boston College, so I got to go to class tomorrow morning."
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, that's a really good point for a lot of high academic kids. Like that's what it is. Like, at a place like Boston College, and obviously that's Power 5, but like that's the same story. I can tell a million times getting off a bus at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning of, hey, like, what do you got on the off day tomorrow on Monday? Well, I got to make up a bunch of work and I got class all day. So I'm going to be in class at 8 a.m. because we got to get to practice normally the rest of the week, by 2. So I'm going to be in class at 8 a.m. I'm like, it's like 2:45 in the morning. We got a 25-minute bus ride back. Like, you're not getting to bed till 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, what time are you going to wake up? You know, and I remember there was guys, coach, I'm not even going to bed. I'm just going to go right to the library and I'll go to bed early tomorrow night. And I remember the first time it happened when they said it, when what the player said it to me, I was like, holy moly, like this is serious. But you if you want to play at that level, like it takes that level of discipline in the classroom and on the field to be able to do it at that level.
And that's not also mentioning the amount of work they're doing on the bus or the plane ride on the way home. Like that's something too. Like they're trying to find hours to just hammer out stuff to try to get them a little bit more ahead. You know, we've all seen it as coaches, the amount of times we'd get home at 11, 12 o'clock and it's like, yeah, I got 8 o'clock class tomorrow. Like, you know, I probably won't get to bed till 2, 3 o'clock because I got some more work to do. Then it's 5 hours of sleep and into the classroom all day. Because Mondays, you know, as we all know, like Monday's your off day generally in college baseball. Like they load up on classes because you want to have the least amount of missed class during the season. So Monday's the day where you load up. So guys were just, you know, hammered with class. So, you know, the amount of work that you see get done on the bus, on the plane, whatever it is, like it's a real thing that you're going to go through for 4 years.
Hotel lobby. I mean, I remember my first road trip at Brown. Like we were going out to eat as coaches after an afternoon game on a Friday, and the entire lobby was filled with our players doing work. We walked out.
Yep.
Like, whoa. So
It takes a special player, but it takes a special kid to be really good in that setting. And that's not just, you know, we're focused on the Ivy Leagues because it's the easy one to talk about, but this whole concept that we're talking about, the commitment level, the fact that you need to be a really good baseball player first, like that is the same in the NESCAC. It's the same at University of Rochester. It's the same at Case Western and Emory, that they need baseball players who are also smart, not a bunch of smart kids who treat baseball like a hobby. And the barrier to entry there is, we'll get into this at the back end of it, but the barrier to entry in the academic world it's very high. Simply put, it is incredibly high. And, you know, we talk about the exclusivities. There's just not as many spots, you know, so if you want one of those spots, you need to be good enough and you need to do well enough academically to get in the mix with those schools. Anything else you guys got on that?
No, I think we illustrated the point of how tough it is and what you need to actually be able to do to compete at a high level at those schools.
This is one of, you know, we talk about having a little bit of energy. I might get a little assy with this one because I think it's something that people who don't know, they find the easy way out when it comes to talking about what the level of play is. And this kind of goes back to kind of the assumption that we have earlier around, like, well, if you're smart, you can play in the Ivy League. It's like the level of play is super high, period. And I'm going to throw out a couple numbers here because this, I think, will help frame some stuff up for people, you know, because we always equate level of play to draft picks and all that kind of good stuff. So since 2015, so this is 9 drafts. These are some numbers. Mind you, there was no 2020. That's why it's 9 drafts. 56 Ivy League kids have been drafted. That is not counting in the last several years the players that finished their careers at another school, the Hayden Schatz of the world, the Jackson Appels, all the guys who went to Duke, the guys who are at UVA, guys who ended up getting drafted that didn't get drafted with an Ivy League uniform, right? So 56. Patriot League, another high academic conference across the board, Lehigh, Bucknell, Lafayette, Army, Navy, Holy Cross, right? All just elite academic institutions, 27 guys. We'll slip to the A10. The teams that I don't list on this one, don't get butthurt, but I got Davidson, GW, Fordham, and Richmond as what I would qualify as the kind of high academic. All the other schools are great schools. Richmond, Davidson, GW, I think they're just in a little bit of a different category from an admission standpoint. 32 guys in those 4 schools drafted. Georgetown's had 11. Wofford's had 11. William and Mary, one of the top public schools in the country, has had 13. These are all non-Power 5 programs, right? We're not talking about Stanford, and everybody knows Duke and Virginia and, you know, schools like that, Michigan, you know, Vanderbilt. But you're talking academic first schools that play really high level of baseball that had those number of draft picks. And I think if you hear those numbers and you can't wrap your head around the type of player that is required to be good at that level, I'm not sure what else is going to get through to you when you're talking about the level of play in those conferences and what they're able to produce from a high academic perspective. And really what I'm driving at is that first point you made. You need to be a really good player, period, to play at any of those types of schools. And that's where it starts for all of these guys. And the idea that it's a lesser level of baseball because it's smart kids is just something that I have a tough time stomaching, because I've worked with these kids. I've watched these kids play. They're incredible kids because of what they do on and off the field, but they're also a lot of these kids are really high level baseball players.
Well, that doesn't account. I mean, I 1,000% agree with you. I also think that, like, the A10 specifically in this example, like, that's not counting everyone else in that conference that is getting drafted as well, which is probably
84 right. In that window from the conference total.
Right. So you have 84 in that conference alone. Like, in order to be able to compete, you need guys that are going to be able to, you know, hopefully play professionally. You know, and it speaks to the whole, like, you know, if you're good enough, you're going to be able to get found kind of mindset that a lot of people have. And it's really hard, especially nowadays with TrackMan and True Media and everything else, to be able to, you know, they have way more information on guys, and you can do some things and they can find out more information on guys that way. And it doesn't preclude the guys who are super high academic from getting drafted. You know, and obviously there's a little bit of a lesser number at the Division II and Division III level, but you're still going to see guys who went up and through COVID and you know, played in the NESCAC and ended up getting drafted out of another Division I school or signed professionally. And then the Division III guys that do have, you know, a chance that actually, you know, some of them might not end up getting drafted, some might end up signing for a year or two, but, you know, the level of play across all of college baseball is obviously high, and it's something that we talk about quite a bit. You know, but I think that, you know, the idea that it's just a bunch of nerds playing baseball, you know, like when we played in college, it was like, well, we're playing Dartmouth today, like, got to beat them on the field because they'll beat you in life. You know, like, those things are true, but it's also true now. Like, they're like, the Ivy League's a really, really good league. Like, you have to be able to show up and play day in and day out in order to be able to, you know, compete against those guys. You know, the Columbias and the Penns of the world right now, like, they're really, really, really good baseball programs, and they can go toe to toe with a lot of people. You know, Jonathan already mentioned it. Penn and Columbia have been in regional finals in the last 3 or 4 years. Like, you know, you don't luck into a regional final. Like, you get to a regional final because you have guys who are really good at baseball, and you're able to compete with the really good programs of the world to be able to get to that spot. You know, it's not necessarily something where, you know, yes, this game is played kind of in a vacuum in those scenarios, but, you know, shoot, if you're going to end up in a regional final, like, there's a lot of programs that don't end up in regional finals every year, and to have an Ivy League in a regional final over the last couple of years, like, that's a huge deal for the academic world and the kids that compete in those conferences, because it justifies how good they are at baseball.
I actually missed Yale, I believe, was in the Oregon State regional final as well. So I think I missed them as well. So I think we had 3 in the last, since 2015, that were in regional finals, which is pretty impressive, because it's what you're at, you know, 32 teams, you know, left in the country, you know,
32 players on your roster.
Yeah, exactly.
To get to a regional, I mean, that's
impressive. One thing I'll say to kind of piggyback, because you guys kind of nailed it. One thing I will say is that if you want to go to a high academic school and you want to play and you think, hey, I want to go to an Ivy League school, you better surround yourself with an organization or a group of people that know what they're talking about when it comes to high academic recruiting. Because I think one of the biggest myths, like Andy said, is just like, oh, you know, like, yeah, and I kind of started with this, but it's, oh, you know, they like to play baseball, and, you know, but you need to go somewhere and play with a group or be surrounded by people that can tell you the reality of hey, you don't fit there academically. Hey, you do fit there academically, or you don't fit there athletically, or vice versa. But you can't just go and just say, hey, I'm on this team and I'm going to try to do this on my own and I'm going to go to 3 camps and I'll see what happens. It's probably not going to work out because there's probably something that you're missing in the process, a school, information on academics or how athletic you have to be, that you really need if you want to go somewhere in a high academic, environment. You need somebody that can help you get there because it's really, really, really hard. And I know I dropped this stat, last year when we did this. The Ivy League, and Keith kind of hinted at it a couple seconds ago. The Ivy League, Patriot League, and those schools that Andy mentioned are statistically way more difficult to play at than it is to play in the SEC in terms of numbers. Way harder to get a spot at one of those schools we just mentioned than it is to go and play in the SEC and commit to an SEC school. Numbers tell us. We did the math last year on here. It's not even close. So don't fall into this category of, it's high academic, so I can probably play there. You got to be really good, like we just said. You got to be really, really good.
I think that brings us into the topic around, because I think this is another one you got to dispel, the level of play at the Division III level. The days of just being able to go play Division III baseball because you want to, they've been long gone. But it's gotten a lot more competitive in recent years because of the transfer portal. We got the roster crunch coming up. It's only going to make Division III baseball better. And these high academic schools, once again, they have limited amount of spots. They have a limited amount of support that they can provide from an academic perspective. And if you're not on people's radar early and you don't understand where you fit, because believe me, there's tiers within that tier, right? There's a big difference between certain high academic schools versus other high academic schools from a baseball perspective. You don't know where you fit in that world. I would argue it's harder to sort through that than it is the Ivy League. The Ivy League, it's 8 schools. If you're a right-handed pitcher and you're not 86 to 89, it probably ain't happening, right? Those are more straightforward, but you have a longer list of high academic Division IIIs, and you need to know where you fit in that world. And if you don't have somebody who's experienced with that, if you don't understand the level of play at the different programs, what they're looking for, once again, they have to be a lot more targeted with what they do with recruiting because they don't have these never-ending rosters. Some Division III schools will have 50 people. University of Rochester is not going to have 50 guys on the roster. Neither is Tufts, neither is Colby. They're not going to do it. So they have to be smarter about what they bring in. And do you have somebody, if you're a catcher, do you have somebody who can make a phone call to a coach and say, hey, are you guys actually looking for a catcher in this camp? Because I think I got a guy that's good. Hey, we brought in 2 last year. We got a junior and a senior. Unless he can get in on his own, we're not going to be able to support a catcher this year. That's just as valuable as knowing that a school likes you. So that Division III world, to me, I think it's underappreciated, and I think a lot of people don't understand how good you have to be to play at those schools. And just throwing your hat in the ring at some random showcase because Amherst and Tufts and Wesleyan are all there. You better be somebody that an Ivy League coach is interested in, because that's the guys that they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick Google search, and I mean, off the top of my head, Hopkins lost in the national championship in 23. 22 Catholic was in the World Series. 21 you had Hopkins. Who else is in this? Hopkins, Wheaton, WashU. These are the 8 teams left in the World Series. You're talking about some really, really high-end academic schools. Washington, Jefferson was in it, in 2019. It's not necessarily something where it's just it's high-end Division III baseball from an academic standpoint. I'm going to be able to go play it's 13th grade. It's not going to happen. anymore. SWAT was in it back in 18. So there's the high end academic world is generally represented in the World Series every year with the not so high end academic world, but they're gonna be represented in the Division III World Series every year because the quality of baseball is that good at that level. So you're going to end up with a lot of really high end academic schools. Not a lot every year. Like some years is going to be 3 or 4. I mean, Trinity won it back in what was that, 13 or 14 when Deck was there. And they were like 47-1.
They lost one game to Johns Hopkins in the championship round. One game.
So that was
they lost to Hopkins.
2008, excuse me. They were the national champion, and they were 47-1 and lost to Hopkins in the championship whatever series. So like it's it's not something that's new to us, but it is something that is legitimately that happens every year in and year out, that you're going to have high end academic schools, especially at the Division III level, that are competing nationally, albeit in the World Series, but also. This is discounting the guys that are now like the teams that are making it to super regionals, and you're one step away from making it to the World Series, where like you're one of 16 teams left in the country, and there's a lot of them out there nowadays, and it's the level of play there is super high.
I tell this to guys all the time. The reason that it happens that way and why we've seen so many good players end up at Division III schools is because they're able to take a kid that's so close to being an Ivy League type of player, a Patriot League type of player, and they're getting the kid that's a half a step down, that maybe is just one tool short or just a little bit worse than the kid they got, or the right-handed hitting shortstop, ended up going Division III because they needed a left-handed hitting shortstop, or it's so close, those kids that end up at those high-end Division III academic schools because of, again, how exclusive that club is to play Division I at that in that academic environment. And those kids don't want to sacrifice academics to go to, and I know there's some good Division II schools out there, that Hillsdale, Colorado School of the Mines, just to name a few. But most of those kids are not going to fit a Division II school profile academically. So what's the next option is that super high-end Division III. And that's the misconception, especially at the Division III level too, is that, oh, well, again, I got good grades, I can play a little bit. No. Those schools are taking the best of the best that's left after you take 100 off the top. There's only about 100 that are going to go to that into the Division I realm. So now player 101 and 104 and 111, they're going to those Division III schools. So you got to be really, really, really good to play at those Division III schools as well, because there's so many good players out there that fall through the cracks, so to say, and end up Division III that are just really, really, really good.
And it's going to get more difficult, right? The filter's coming down, right? And I think that takes us right into the roster crunch, right? And I'll throw a couple thoughts out and we'll let go where this goes. I don't think from a roster perspective, this has an impact on the Ivy Leagues and the Patriot Leagues, because they're not getting to 35 or 34, whatever they end up ultimately settling on. It looks like it's going to be 34. Like, that's not a big deal for them because of the admission standards, right? So I don't think it's going to affect them from a roster perspective. Like, they're not going to have to cut 6 kids this spring to get down to their roster limit. But this is where I do think it's going to have an impact. The kid who used to walk on at Stanford, right? Number 36 through 40 at Stanford, 36 through 40 at Duke, 36 through 40 at Virginia, 36 through 40 at Vanderbilt, Michigan, you name them. Those kids are now going to be looking at the Ivy League, Davidson, Wofford. So that level of play, they're going to have access to a kid that 3 years ago probably doesn't even give them the time, because now Virginia and Duke, they don't have room for that kid anymore. So you can't take the super high academic kid at Duke and give him a jersey and see how he pans out. Like, you can't do it anymore. So that kid is now accessible to the Ivy League. So that means there's a whole bunch of kids who were Ivy League players 2 years ago or a year ago, or think they're Ivy League players right now, that because of this trickle down effect that's coming with the roster change, they're not Ivy League players anymore. And so I think that filter, that group that those Division III schools get to choose from moving forward, flush with talent. I think you're going to see that level of play. And I think it's true for all of Division III baseball. But I think that roster cut, it's not going to affect them from a roster perspective, but they're going to have access to better players than they've had recently just because of that.
I think it cuts it in half. If I were like kind of do the math of, it's about half, 50% of those, spots that would have went a year ago, 2 years ago, will now be occupied by guys that are Power 5, walk on, player 36 to 40, 35 to 40, whatever you want to call it. They're occupied by those spots now because those kids that were there in that were kind of fell into that now are back in the mix to get recruited. And that talent pool, like you just said, Andy, now is just going way up, because when you're talking about 8 catchers a year that get to go play in the Ivy League, if 3 of those spots, which probably are, to be honest with you, player 35 to 40 on a lot of those rosters are catchers, you got to be pretty good. You got to be pretty damn good. And I think it's a really good point. It doesn't necessarily change in terms of how they operate, but it does change with the talent pool, because the talent pool is now going up. Well, guess what that means for all those those fringe Division I guys that ended up there. Now they're going Division III in those high academic Division IIIs. You're talking about the level of play going way up in the high academic realm, because, again, going back to how exclusive it is with those types of degrees, you're flushing it with a ton of talent from those Power 5 schools that, again, would have had 35 to 40. And if they decide that they're not going to let you go with the no red shirt, it's actually more than that, because you got to think there's probably 3 guys on all those rosters that are red shirt that are now not in there either. So now they're back into the pool of players. We just elevated our level of play by a lot.
I'm in Division III high academic school right now. I'm pretty happy with the kids that I know I'm going to have access to. And if you're smart and you're going through this process, you need to have somebody who's able to sift through it real quick, because that timeline for the high academic Division III is going to get sped up. And you want to make sure you have one of those spots, and you need to know pretty early, like, can I play in the Patriot League or can I play in the Ivy League? And somebody needs to shoot you straight, because if you can't, wasting your time to try to find one of those spots when you should be putting your energy to another level of play, like, it could be super advantageous if you already know where you stand in July versus figuring out at the end of August, like, I'm not an Ivy League player. Like, you've stacked the chips in your favor significantly.
Oh, it's not just that. It's the guys from the Patriot League and the other leagues that are going to trickle down to the threes as well. Like, it's just going to increase. With the old, like that fringe Division I player that you'd always hear about, and you're kind of looking for at the Division III level. Like, that fringe Division I player has now changed from what he looks like. Like, he's no longer the fringe Division I player of the past. Like, that fringe Division I player is a current Division I player right now. Like, so that, like, what you're evaluating, what you're seeing, and what you're looking for is instantly elevated for that. And if you're not kind of in that realm, like, it's going to be difficult. Like, our are the Division threes still going to take guys that are a little bit more of a project that they, can project out a little bit? Yeah, absolutely they will. But they're going to be able to stack their rosters in a little bit more of an advantageous way where they actually have like bona fide, legitimate Division I type talent on their rosters because they have the degree to go with it, and they're going to be able to put their programs are already successful now. They're just going to get even more successful when they're able to add in, more guys. And I do think, in some respects, it's going to level the playing field to Division III. Not to say that it's inadequate, but there are schools that aren't necessarily that academic that have dipped into the transfer portal and done a very good job of finding success there. I think it's going to even out the playing field a little bit more where like now the high academic world has more access to better players, which is going to elevate them, which across the board elevates all of Division III well. So I think it's one of those things where you're going to start seeing, instead of having, Hopkins and Catholic or Wheaton and, SWAT and schools like that, Trinity and the schools that have had, success in the near future or near past, like you're going to see more that are more high academic that are competing at the national level because they have access to better players and they have the degree to go with it.
That is correct, Coach. I think we checked the boxes here, but I want to open it up if there's any additional comments on the kind of high academic realm here. Anything on your end, Jonathan? Anything you want to add?
No, I think we really hit on, a lot of it. And I think, like I said, the one thing I would tell, guys is make sure you surround people like we said too, Andy, surround yourself with people that know what this process looks like, because especially certain parts of the country, that, maybe don't send that many kids to high academic schools. There can be a lot of misinformation about what it is, how good it is, contacts there. It's important, to have somebody be able to help, you get in front of that school too. It's super important because when you're running the numbers, you're just by pure odds. It's hard, right? We just explained that for the last 45 minutes. But if you are good enough, you want to be able to make sure that that person or that group can get you in front of that school so that they can see you. So you can have an opportunity to go there, because that happens all the time is, you're a really good player and, you play, 5 or 6 tournaments in the state of Texas and you're like, hey, I want to go to an Ivy League school. Well, if an Ivy League school doesn't know about you, they're not going to see you. And now you're going to get to the middle of July, end of July and go, oh, I want to try to get seen by Penn. Well, Penn's done with shortstops in 2025. Penn's done with, right-handed pitchers now or left-handed. So now you're stacking the deck even more against yourself because you didn't understand, hey, this is what I want to do if I want to play at one of these schools. And I think it's hard and it's not an easy process, but it's even harder at these schools that, have certain groups, certain guys that they talk to on a regular basis that they pick the phone up and you say, hey, what do you have in 26? Hey, what do you have in 27? I need to get in front of your guys. Who do I need to see? Who do I need to go and see? Do I need to go see them in high school? Because again, those spots go really, really fast. And again, the level of play is going up even more. You want to try to put yourself in a position to succeed, not only in the Ivy League, not only Division I, but the Division III realm as well. You want to put yourself at an advantage to get an opportunity to go to one of those schools.
Yeah. My only thing I'll add, and we don't have to go down this dark rabbit hole, but the one thing I'll add, I don't think that the transfer portal, aside from what we're about to experience with the roster crunch, like it's not heavily affected in the academic world for 2 reasons. One, I think a lot of the transfer admissions are pretty cut and dry in the academic world, where like the transfer deadline is like April 1st. Like you might not even know you're transferring to get in there. But the other is, if you're transferring from a let's call it a non-academic school into an academic school, like you run the risk of losing a lot of credits when you transfer. And for that reason, I think you're going to have you're not going to see the amount of kids transferring into high academic schools that you see at other schools that aren't necessarily that academic, because you're not going to lose a ton of credits, and they can kind of get guys in a little bit later than other schools might be able to. So, while you're going to see it this year, I don't necessarily foresee there being a huge uptick in kids transferring into high academic schools from what we currently see, right? Like it currently happens. But I don't think there's going to be a giant surge after kind of the roster crunch. I think it's going to kind of remain the same as to what you see now, just because I think we talk about how tough the academics are. Like you can't go from I'll use our alma mater so we don't piss people off, but you can't go from a Marist to a Columbia and keep all of your credits and think that you're going to walk in there as a junior. Like you're probably going to go in there as a sophomore, just because the academic level of the classes are going to be below what it is that is offered at that school. So just something to keep in mind. I don't necessarily, that's just my thought. I could be dead wrong on what I'm talking about, but that's just kind of what I think when it comes to what's going to happen over the next couple of years. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't transfer from like a Columbia to a RPI or a U of R, right? Like your credits are going to carry, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking.
No, I agree with you there. The transfer in the academic world is just different. And the Ivy League and the Patriot League and stuff, they don't have as much access, right? Like you can't get a kid from a state school to transfer into Columbia just because he had a 3.8. Like it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. And on the academic thing, I'll close out with this, because I think that we touched on, you need to be a really good player first and foremost. But one of the things I think a lot of people get wrong is they don't understand the academic rigor that's required for a lot of these schools. And if you're a 2027, 2026 might be a touch too late to change your schedule, but you need to have somebody in your corner who can look at your transcript and actually tell you, hey, you need to get another AP. If you're trying to get into one of these schools, you need another AP this year. Or be able to look at your schedule and your transcript and say, hey, I know you have a 4.0, but if you take out PE class, driver's ed, and your intro to art class, you've only got a 3.4. And that's what they're going to be looking at. And it's not just a straight GPA. And being able to look at a transcript and be able to tell a kid, hey, I think you're sure, or hey, maybe I think you can get into this school because of the rigor that you have. So having somebody who can put eyes on a transcript and help you through the academic process is going to help you get on some of those guys' radar if you're good enough. So I think we covered it. Any parting thoughts, gentlemen?
Nailed it.
All right.
Come on.
Jonathan, you're the best. We
Thanks,
love you.
guys. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
Always.
We'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Tune in next week. We'll talk to you then. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.